Hi everyone. I finally caught Penny Lane is Dead this afternoon after hearing non-stop hype about its supposed extreme gore and wild stories of a audience member fainting in the theatre during early screenings. That kind of buzz had me curious, but I have to admit I left feeling somewhat let down by the gap between the marketing promises and the actual film. While there are bloody and violent sequences, it's pretty tame stuff when stacked up against the truly brutal and unforgiving horror movies we've seen this year. The shock value feels understated, and the film never quite reaches the visceral intensity it seems to be aiming for. But don't let that fool you, because this is still a really good movie. I went into this movie completely blind, no trailers, no plot details, just a few promotional pictures that didn't reveal much. I wasn't even sure what subgenre it was leaning towards, whether straight slasher, supernatural, or something else entirely. That mystery kept me engaged either way. The story is set in 1986 during a scorching Australian summer. Three best friends head to a beach house for what should be a carefree celebration, only for a seemingly harmless prank to spiral horribly wrong, turning their getaway into a blood-soaked fight for survival. On paper, it's a solid setup that taps into classic horror tropes while adding a sunny coastal Aussie twist. As someone who grew up as a kid from the 80's, the nostalgia hit hard and was probably the film's biggest strength for me. Personally, it brought me right back to those long, endless summers spent at the beach or in backyards with friends and family. The heat, the music, the fashion, and that specific carefree yet reckless energy. The 80's aesthetics are handled quite well overall, with careful attention to production design, costumes, and soundtrack choices that made large portions of the movie more enjoyable than they might have been otherwise. Still, there were moments where it felt a bit too polished and modern, missing that authentic grain and imperfections of the era. The acting is generally top notch, with the cast delivering committed performances that help sell the escalating chaos. I generally liked these characters at the start and found myself rooting for them as things fell apart. That said, some of the acting veers heavily into theatrical territory. While it mostly suits the bonkers over the top behavior of the group, it occasionally crosses into exaggerated territory that pulls you out of the tension rather than enhancing it. The camaraderie feels real, but the delivery sometimes undermines the horror elements. In terms of horror thrills, the film has its moments. There are some generally effective gore scenes that deliver decent practical effects and visceral impact. Horror fans will likely lap this up as a fun, crowd-pleasing ride that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's extremely entertaining in bursts, particularly during the chaotic middle act. However, the overall violence never reaches the heights suggested by the pre-release buzz, leaving it feeling relatively restrained in my opinion. My criticisms are what ultimately hold the film back from a higher score from me. I really wish the filmmakers had embraced a lower grade VHS look throughout. The cleaner, sharper cinematography robs the movie of the gritty analog charm that would have made it far more visually distinctive and immersive. A few sequences had me worried it was veering into full zombie territory with the way certain elements were building, and while I'm glad it ultimately avoided that direction, the teasing felt clumsy and also unresolved. Most disappointing, though, is the ending. I found it extremely unrealistic and unsatisfying, especially considering the brutal events that happened to Penny early on in the film. It undermines much of the tension and emotional weight that came before, landing on a note that feels contrived rather than earned. For a movie that builds so much around survival and consequences, the final act struggles to stick the landing for me. I just found it too unrealistic. All that said, Penny Lane is Dead is still a mostly solid fan service horror effort. It has heart, strong nostalgic appeal, and enough bloody chaos to keep genre enthusiasts entertained for its runtime. It's far from a masterpiece and carries noticeable flaws, but it's the kind of scrappy fun horror flick that plays well with a crowd. A disappointment, but well, I wouldn't call it a disappointment. I still really enjoyed it. And so this movie is worth a watch if you're craving some 80s throwback vibes, but temper your expectations on the gore front. But as I said during this review, I did still really enjoy this movie, and my score for this movie is a 3.5 out of 5. If you like this sort of content, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, as I'll be reviewing more movies in the near future. Until next time, peace.